Hello and welcome to Your Full Scottish from the Yes Bar in Glasgow.
This is a recorded version of the show rather than a normal live version because we had technical issues beyond our control, for which apologies. But hopefully you'll enjoy the show anyway over the next 90 minutes.
And after you've enjoyed it, we'll hope you'll tweet us using the hashtag FullScottish, and we do hope that you'll join us again next week, 12:30, for your next Full Scottish. Thank you. Hello and welcome to Your Full Scottish, coming live to you today from the Yes Bar in Glasgow. We have a cracking lineup for you today, don't we? We really do. We're excited about today's show.
We do. This is programme number 7, so things are going pretty well today, I think, I hope. What about your week, Michelle? How does that?
I've had a really good week, I actually took some time out to watch the Queen's speech, the ceremony, laughed my way through it, the yeomanry in the red and gold. Did you know that they actually have to prevent another gunpowder plot, they go down into the basement and look for gunpowder? Yeah. They're carrying lanterns with candles in them. Yeah.
I don't know. I looked at that. I thought it's ridiculous. There's all these people running around in tights and holding meat.
I know. I actually went. I googled to find out more about it and made the mistake of googling Black Rod. Don't do that.
I'm never going to do that. You go in the doors.
It's not good.
The doors shut and it's crazy. Anyway, lots to do today, so let's crack on. The first thing we've got today is a review of the newspapers. Our guest reviewers today are Alan Muir, who's just been appointed the acting editor of the Scottish Sun, and Suzanne McLaughlin, who's owner of the Yes Bar, where we currently are.
We're also joined by Gordon MacIntyre-Kemp from Business for Scotland. He's going to be talking to us about the cabinet reshuffle, the economy, what Scottish business wants from the SNP government, and we'll touch on the EU as well.
We will, and James Dornan, MSP, is coming on to talk about his calls to David Cameron to come clean about which businesses he pressurised during the independence referendum. Freudian slip, wishful thinking, sorry.
And we're also going to hear about the alternative music festival Knockengorach. We're going to hear from Catch Holmes and from Scottish rapper Loki.
Indeed. First of all, look at the front pages, today's papers. So a lot of them are going with
yes.
But not this one.
Not this one.
This one. A lot of them are going on the football pitch invasion. Sunday Mail, Sunday Post, Sun, winners and sinners. So we'll talk about that later. And the Sunday Herald, that story, exclusive story about Kenny McCaskill's book, suggesting that he broke the Official Secrets Act with that. So there's going to be an investigation into that.
We've got the Scottish Mail on Sunday paying fat men £400 to lose weight.
We're all going to be rich. Scotland Sunday, second referendum, a suggestion that people's opinions on whether or not there should be a second independence referendum if we leave Europe have changed.
Sunday Times Scotland, Chilcot apparently going to savage Blair and some of the generals when we eventually hear the outcome.
Indeed, and Sunday Telegraph, trade wars, a memo showing that the EU is costing UK billions. Sunday Telegraph,
we'll hear more about that from
having its own agenda there. First story we're going to talk about is the football reports this morning, Alan.
Yeah, I mean, it is first and foremost a bit of a tragedy for Hibs. I mean, they had their historic cup win yesterday, and then it was completely overtaken by the trouble on the pitch. I think probably there's various investigations which will come out of this, but I think in the end it will come down to a very small group of people who have been the main perpetrators of the trouble. And we shouldn't forget that in the main you've got die-hard fans, you've got families enjoying a really good day out. And there have been precedents in the past where there have been pitch invasions and it's all been very friendly and good natured. You know, you go back to Wembley in the 70s and you know it was viewed as being a bit of light-hearted tomfoolery. However, when it strays into the area where people are being allegedly attacked, that's when you've got to draw the line. And it did take a fairly substantial line of police officers summon horses to get the crowd back under control.
There was a spokesman for Hibs, somebody coming out saying that while they didn't condone what happened, they could understand because this was 114 years of hurt playing out.
Yeah.
I don't understand that at all.
Well, I think it's two things, isn't it? You know, the 114 years of hurt playing out as leads to the celebration. So,
well,
you know,
yeah, but not what happened.
Well, I think, again, back to my original point, I think you'll find that in the main, most of the fans who have gone onto the pitch may have done it in thinking that it would be a good-natured celebration, arms round each other, and then obviously trouble's broken out. There are a number of investigations underway, and we'll learn at some point in the future, you know, who the perpetrators are. There's bound to have been CCTV footage or whatever that will get to the heart of it.
In terms of newspapers covering it, it's sometimes a problem. I saw last night some newspapers that had tweeted their back pages on some of their front pages, and both sides were sort of weighing into the debate on Twitter and saying, well, look, basically each one blaming the other side, and it got to a stage for me reading it, you just thought, oh God, can I really be bothered reading any of this again? It's football seems to always end, and not always, but very often end in events like this.
It's Scotland's shame, isn't it? It's just always there. It's always this undercurrent. What should be a good-natured game that people enjoy watching and can take their families to, in a very working-class traditional culture of football, and men take their kids to football, and it's always been. And I personally, I love the football. I love watching football, good football, and Hibs deserved their win yesterday, absolutely, and they deserve it. But it always seems, and again, sorry, I overused that, but it's Scotland's shame. We can't seem to separate this dirty, underhanded, undersided violence and sectarianism, let's call it for what it is, that comes out and rears its ugly head.
Although, I mean, you could, I suppose, venture into the political side of it in terms of the Offensive Behaviour Act and all the moves to try and get rid of that.
Yeah.
I guess everybody has their own views, and that's a deeply unpopular bit of legislation, absolutely. But then, on the other hand, I suppose you could argue that at least it was doing something.
Yeah, I think basically that you have to remember this was an enormous crowd yesterday, lots of emotion, and there is always in a situation like that a danger that, you know, the fuse can be lit. However, the problem here is that we don't know how many of the crowd were involved. We have to wait and find out. You know, so many people there yesterday, most of them having a really good time, most of them in a mood to celebrate, most of them hoping that Hibs would finally win, which they did.
Yeah.
And you can't take that away from the team either.
Absolutely
the team weren't involved,
Nope.
so they should have their moment in the spotlight too.
And indeed, most of their fans should have a chance to savour that.
Yeah.
Okay, moving on to another story that's on the front page of the Mail on Sunday today about a suggestion that if you are obese, you may be paid up to £400 to lose weight. Suzanne, that story caught your eye?
It did. Interestingly, it caught my eye because I thought, oh, cash money. You know, I could stand to lose a few pounds. But interestingly, Richard, it's only men, fat men.
Why are you looking at me?
I'm sounding like that.
Nothing for fat bottom girls, no.
Nothing for fat bottom girls, no. What the comment here, there's a little bit of a talking backwards and forwards, and on the one hand we've got a few medical people weighing in and saying this is a good thing to incentivise people to do what's right for them, and will end up costing the NHS less money in the long run, because obviously...
And do men need to be bribed because they're so stupid?
I think so. I think that
Makes
you know,
sense.
don't start the feminist on blaming all the men, Richard, you know.
The straight man here, feeding your lines.
But I think it is quite interesting because people saying no, fat people should pay when they have medical problems, and they should be charged for clinical care. But to me, what it was interesting was it's the old argument again of, you know, people not wanting to pay. I read a story a few weeks ago, you know, about the mountaineers and people again saying they should be charged for being rescued. And it's about big society, really. Surely we have to look after everyone, and that includes the smokers, the fat people, the motorcycle riders, you know, we either care for everyone or else it starts a a stupid situation of, well, I have no children, so I don't put any of my tax money towards schools. I mean, where does it end? We have a big society. But I thought it's quite interesting that, but what the commentator, Tam Fry, who's a spokesman for the National Obesity Forum, and he's commenting on what happens when the cash runs out. Do they, or do people who are poor start eating? Maybe. More to get cash.
How do you get the cash? To sign up for it, say, right, I'm going on a diet. Because I wouldn't mind a bit of money to lose a bit of weight.
It is actually, it's a bigger story than it seems to be actually. It's a small Institute for Health research amount of 100 obese men are being paid to see does it work, and they'll be weighed at certain times and to see.
Define obese?
Define obese. If your trousers are over a size 40, then you are obese.
Looking at me.
Bit unfair.
I think it's quite interesting. I don't think it's a bad thing.
Well, I think that the knee-jerk reaction would be to criticise it, say, oh, we're just dishing out money to people who can't solve the problem on their own. But where do you draw the line? As Suzanne said, there's all other areas of society where you might have to start charging. And I don't think that should be the case. The reason that they've picked men is apparently because we're less likely, and I would include myself in this, we're less likely to come forward, particularly with a subject like this. And they are only doing it with a small group of people. Because I think the overall cost to the health service for obesity at the moment is £660 million a year. And that's not counting other costs that sort of
the side issues.
The side issues away from that. But my only fear is that you get to the end of it, you've lost all the weight that you've been targeted to lose, and you take the 400 quid and you go out for a curry and a few pints with your mates.
That's where you started.
But you know
what? You get another £400 after that. So
what I think is interesting as well, as they said, sad but interesting, is that they reckon that 74% of Scottish men will be obese by 2030. That's a staggering number. And obesity is clearly an issue in our schools, our school children. 11.8% of primary school children are obese. So there has to be a whole lifestyle change, and I think, adults are all, you could say, a lot of them stuck in their ways and ingrained, and they already have the bad habits. But if we can do something that addresses and get everyone, health visitors, teachers, parents on board, we've got to. It's again, and without linking it back strangely, but something has to be done. We know there is an obesity problem. Again, going back to what we were just talking about with the football, we know there was an issue there. Something has to be done. We can't all just sit back and keep letting it happen. And it'd be interesting to see, interesting to watch the results at the end of the study.
There's another medical story you were looking at today. A scientist has invented robot skin.
Yes.
Do you want to have some robot skin?
If I needed it, I think it'd be a very good thing to have. Yeah, it's a scientist, a Dr. Ravinder from. He's a reader at Glasgow University, and he works with prosthetics, and they're coming up with a robotic skin which is actually able to sense touch. So for the use of prosthetics, etc., it means that people who have a prosthetic arm or leg or whatever, the skin would enable them to feel heat and cold, so it would prevent them from damaging it, for example. But interestingly, in the story, I think it was in the Sunday Herald, they mention a case where a human was actually grabbed in a factory by a robot and crushed against a wall. So they're even talking in terms of this skin being used in industrial robots, where they would be able to know that they were touching organic material, for example, a human, and they would know how to interact with it rather than.
That's so clever.
Yeah, it's very
really
clever.
And
how fantastic as well that, again, going back to the grand old history of Scots and inventors and being at the forefront of science.
Innovation.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Innovation.
Yeah.
Indeed.
That's fantastic.
Suzanne, you saw a story, a very sort of depressing and important story in, I think, the Mail on Sunday, in which a victim of rape is saying to people that it's probably not a good idea to come forward.
Yeah, and I found this particularly depressing, but sadly not surprising, Richard, because there has been gains made, the Scottish, with the introduction of Police Scotland, rape crisis, Glasgow and rape crisis, Edinburgh have said that the way that rape victims have been treated by the police has improved, and there's a kindness and willingness to to look at the whole subject in a better way. But what seems to be happening now is that it's when it gets to the judicial side of it, there's a problem. And this article would certainly lead to believe that there's actually a problem with society, still sadly a problem with society as a whole, and how rape victims are viewed by the general public. And this terribly sad story, this woman, she's a medical professional in her 40s, and you could see the sort of classic, it was outside stalker, unknown to her, grabbed off the street, which and it seemed to be like a kind of open and shut case, and she felt really that she was so hideously treated, violated again and again by the Scots criminal judicial system, and felt like she had been raped once again. And the Crown Office spokespeople have said they're happy to meet with her again, but Sandy Brindley, who's National Coordinator of Rape Crisis Scotland and a fantastic woman, has said that nothing much is changing, and we need to do much more now. And the comment here I'm feeling coming through is society's attitudes towards women who have been raped, and towards women and young men's attitudes towards women has gone back the way. And I wondered, is it anything to do with this instant access to pornography that young men have as well? There's been talks about how the whole gender sexual education skills is not good. It hasn't moved with the times quickly enough with the technology of the times.
Although it's been a perennial problem in that the conviction rate is very low.
It's very low. Most rapes aren't reported, and of those that are, only the tiniest amount are prosecuted.
There was a line in there that you mentioned earlier that someone was saying that the system was actually designed to break the victims.
Absolutely, because if you're a rape victim, you're not viewed as you're a witness for the prosecution, and of course the defence's complete objective is to break witnesses in whichever way they can. And it's quite interesting. It's one of the only crime. I would say that it's the only crime where a man can say. A man can basically admit that admit that they raped someone and say, "Oh, well, I was taunted. She drank so much. It was her fault. I was obliged to do it. The clothes she wore encouraged me." In any other crime, that's a confession. And here, this is part of the defence in a rape case. And we don't seem to be getting better. I remember I did a bit of volunteer work with Glasgow Rape Crisis 27, 28 years ago, and it was the same then when we were going through the same situation. Something has to be done.
Yeah, I think that it makes for grim reading, and we have seen stories like this before where the same complaint is made. The one little ray of light in that whole article I thought was Michael Matheson, where he said that he agrees that something should be done. I think we're now in the cusp of the next 5 years where the government will be looking to make inroads and things where they feel that, or where the public has got this sort of view that we're not making progress. And this
Michael MacArthur is very progressive. I've met him and like him very much personally, and he's been very positive. And the amount of work that's been done and pushed by Michael MacArthur, in progressive way forwards towards women and crimes of sexual violence is fantastic. But these women are still, it won't change things for this woman and those like her. And this is bringing up here again, there's the whole thing about the not proven verdict, which is unique to
Scotland. Yeah, indeed. And the story on the Sunday Herald, which front page of Sunday Herald, which is a follow-up to a story which started last week when the Sunday Times started publishing extracts from Kenny McCaskill's new book. According to the Sunday Herald, there's a suggestion that Kenny McCaskill may have broken the Official Secrets Act in the book, and there's a suggestion that he may face some problems because of that. You saw that story, Alan?
Yeah, I was a wee bit concerned about the story in that it does mention that the Foreign and Commonwealth Office didn't know about any of these allegations until the reporter who wrote the story called them up. So there's not been obviously a lot of time to sort of consider what areas of the book they might be talking about, and it may not turn out to be the case. But in general terms, I think that perhaps it's questionable if it does turn out to be the case that a person who is in a public position is able to benefit from information that could only have been known by them and should have been treated as being private, confidential, or whatever. And actually, if it has got a bearing on the case, which we now know is being reinvestigated, there's a lot of big work being done on it at the moment. Then why wasn't that put forward at the time, or was it put forward at the time? We don't know.
But are they damned if they do, damned if they don't?
Yeah.
And I mean, people are constantly calling for politicians to be much more open, more transparent, talk about why they make the decisions they do, and then
is this the way to do it, though?
Is this the way to do it?
I don't think they should charge people for doing that. Oh yeah, I'll be transparent and I'll put it in a book and you can buy the book. Somehow I think that's a bit weird. I mean, my problem with this story is that if you had information that you could put into the public arena, why didn't you do that at the time? Why wait till later on? I think it's either covered by the Official Secrets Act or it's not. I don't know what steps were taken before the publication of the book to check that. I don't know.
Well, it does talk about it being in the public arena, some of it at that point, but then the investigation kind of veered away from that. It'll be interesting to know whether the new investigation is actually coming back to that original theory and it's now being looked at properly again. Yeah,
I mean, I guess there's another kind of discussion about the SNP in the news towards most of this week about suggestions that Stuart Hosey and Angus MacNeil had affairs with the same women, and that's been running for most of the week. I think there's not so much in the papers about it today, but there are a few analytical pieces about it, and to look at what happens in the fallout from that suggestion. But I guess when we were talking about it earlier, my kind of surprise here when I was talking to you two about it was that you, I guess, took a dim view of the women concerned. Would that be accurate to say?
Yeah, that would be fair. I mean, at the risk of being a little bit men are bad, but men are bad. I expect no less.
Are you saying that men are bad, so we just live with the fact that
No, we don't, but I expect better from women. There is a sisterhood do not do that to other women. That is categorically wrong. No, absolutely, the person who's married carries the blame, absolutely. But women, I expect better of other women. I'm disgusted.
Do you, I mean, I get a bit worried about blaming the women. The male, during the week, pretty much did what the male does. And what the male does, in my view, is in any given circumstance, it's always the women's fault. And I don't like that. I think I've got a problem with that. But so that's why I'm surprised that women take a slightly different view.
First of all, we don't know all of the circumstances of this. However, there are 3 people involved, and they all knew their own circumstances, and they all knew what they were doing when they were doing it, and they are all intelligent enough to know the consequences should those circumstances become public. There's speculation in the Sunday Herald today by Tom Gordon that there's going to be a very frosty meeting between Nicola Sturgeon and Stuart Hosey tomorrow. I think there's a meeting in Westminster to celebrate a year since their historic victory, and that may well be the case. There's been a lot of talk this week about how it won't affect the popularity of the SNP, and in particular it won't affect the popularity of Nicola, but I do wonder whether when the 2 men in question are on doorsteps talking to women, it surely has to have a bearing on their own personal popularity, and perhaps does that then sort of veer into the area of the general electorate thinking, well, we thought the SNP were a wee bit different, but here they are doing some of the stuff that other parties have been criticised for in the past.
Talking about that this morning and saying that yes, that was the way that they want to be seen, and the only way, in my opinion, to continue with that is for the 2 men in question to apologise for what they did while they were in public office, for letting down the people who voted for them, for letting down the party, and I think by apologising and showing that they are prepared to be responsible for their actions, it's a way to move on, because that doesn't happen in politics. People don't apologise.
Do women look at these kind of stories in a different way than
I suppose I don't. Maybe I'm slightly different. I don't care. I just don't care about other people's sex lives. I just don't care. I'm not interested. I'm interested in how they do their job. But that said, I'd be fooled to think that everybody thinks the same as me. It's not something I want to read. It's not something I would buy a paper to read. I'm not interested. I care about how people perform their life and not the sadness of their own marriages. That's, to me, I think I take another view. I think politicians are entitled to a private life. That's not to excuse how they behave within it, but I don't think it's my business. But clearly people are interested that sort of stuff does sell papers, people do buy it. Will it affect popularity? How can it not? You know, it's, how can it not?
One of the areas I guess that could affect us would be some suggestion about Stuart Hosey's role as the person in charge of the summer push to renew the independence, the case for independence. And there's a story in the Scotland Sunday this morning, a front page story about changing attitudes to whether or not there should be an independence referendum number 2 if there is if Britain votes to pull out of Europe. Do you think, Suzanne, do you think that is a trigger?
Of course. But I think it's my opinion that people are a little bit tired of even people on the yes side and very definitively in this bar and here in the chat, and it's a very yes bar by definition. People are tired of election campaigns, they're tired of the talk of it. I'm getting the feeling that people just kind of want to watch the telly for a wee bit, put their feet up, I think there has been, we've seen that people have, there's been a little bit of a nasty, shall we say, elections in themselves don't make for making friends. And I think there's been some bloodletting and some friendship making and a building of bridges. So I think it's a very good thing that we were talking earlier, that the key players of Yes, reach out and talk to each other again, Women Friendly, Lawyers for Yes, Academics for Yes, and, the bigger Business for Scotland, and make friends. Yeah. And build bridges. That's my feelings. That's got to be done first.
The Sun in the last general election, Sun supported SNP. The Sun didn't support independence in the referendum campaign. So your support for the SNP, I guess, you can tell me, is more to do with their ability to run the country.
Absolutely. I mean, we didn't not support independence. We just sort of went down a middle path. We felt it was a very important decision that. Do people listen to newspapers these days? I don't think as much as they used to. Didn't think it was right for us to dictate to people what they should do with the biggest vote that we've had in living memory. I think Suzanne's right. I think the electorate have got fatigue. And I think we'll see that next month when we analyse the turnouts for the EU referendum. Personally, I think that the SNP government have got a big job to do now. They're just at the start of 5 years with the new powers. Nicola's already staked her whole reputation on reforming the education system. She's put her best man in charge of that. So I think the prospect of another referendum is never going to go away, and it may well be that these groups who were engaged in the fight before might band together separately from the SNP to talk about how we can get a yes to underway or whatever. But I think it might detract from, at the moment anyway, I think it might detract from what the government have to do, and I think there's big challenges ahead.
Okay, we'll talk a bit more about IndieRef later on in the programme. We'd love to talk about the competition of the day, which is in the Sun, your paper, Alan, which is...
Do you?
I would love to talk about it. It's about offering the prize of a swimming pool and olive oil, which is, I think, a reference to a super injunction, which, of course, we can't talk about, so we're going to have to bring the newspaper review to a close here. But Alan, thank you very much for helping us out today. And while we say goodbye to Alan, we're now going to say hello to Catch Holmes, who's our director of the Knockin' Door Music Festival, which takes place in Ayrshire next weekend. Catch.
Thanks, Alan.
Bye, Alan.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Catch.
Hi.
Good morning.
Welcome. So, Knockin' Door, I have to be really honest, I had never heard about it at all, but got really excited when I was looking online at what's happening over the kind of acts that are coming along. Tell us a bit more about it.
Yeah, well, it has occasionally gets referred to as Scotland's wee gem or best kept secret, because we've actually been going for 19 years now, so we were one of the first sort of greenfield alternative festivals in Scotland, and we have sort of quite a wide range of different types of music. I've brought a colourful poster.
Excellent.
The cameras can see that.
I'm sure it can.
With the full lineup.
And you've got a website. Have you got a website?
The bottom,
at the bottom, yeah. Fine. So you can look at the website, see the full lineup. It's called the World Ceilidh.
Yes.
What's the sort of musical? I mean, presumably there'll be a social philosophy behind the festival and a musical philosophy. Can you deal with the musical philosophy first of all? World Ceilidh. What does that suggest?
World Ceilidh kind of does what it says on the tin. So it's a ceilidh, which is a word for gatherings, storytelling, drinking, dancing. And we bring people and music from all parts of the world into a valley in the mountains of Galloway for a ceilidh, but a kind of wider ceilidh that involves the whole world.
Okay, so this year's lineup includes, I noticed some people from Jamaica, Black Uhuru for instance, big reggae band from the 70s, early 80s I guess. So who else you got on?
So yeah, Black Uhuru are probably travelling the furthest because they're actually coming from Jamaica, but we've got quite a few, always put on quite a few Scottish acts, quite a lot of trad acts, but also Scottish acts that aren't necessarily so traditional. And we're going to hear from one of those, I think, in a wee while. And then we've got bands that come from, they're mainly UK based, but they also come from across Europe, that bring together music styles from different parts of the world. So we sort of call it roots music loosely. So some of that's coming from quite traditional cultures, but then brought into the kind of contemporary age. So we've got like Venezuelan, Ghanaian, Latin American, Bulgarian, music from all over.
Brilliant. How many people do you normally get?
3,000 is our sort of top capacity, so we're kind of big enough to discover new things and meet new people, but small enough that you sort of still feel part of a community and bump into your pals all the time.
Okay. Is it a real family event? Because obviously some festivals aren't, but it sounds as if it might be.
We've always really catered for people of all ages, so whether you want to party if you're 5 or 85, and we have a really broad range, and sometimes we have like 3 generations of the same family attend, and because we've been going 19 years, we've actually got some kids that have grown up coming to the festival, and they're now like young adults and they're coming back. So, and it just makes for a really nice atmosphere, it's chilled out, but everyone still likes to have a good party.
How does it work, like doing a festival like this? How much time does it take? When does it kick in terms of your year? When do you start panicking, thinking, God, I've not got enough acts yet? And when you're putting that build together, what are you trying to achieve?
That's a lot of questions.
Yes, I'd like to know first, how does your year?
Well, it's all the time, but it's like like all festivals, it tends to ramp up in the months beforehand. So you get all these seasonal summer festivals, city or rural. They kind of bring loads and loads of staff on in the last 2 months, and then you end up with like quite a big amount of people. But like in the quiet times, like just after we've had it, so June, July, it's like a couple of us or something sort of ticking away, and then it sort of starts to build up as the lineup builds up. We never really don't have enough bands because there's a lot of great music out there, and it's just a question of what we can fit in, to be honest, because there's so much good music, and there's a lot of it really great stuff in Scotland as well, and it's just how much we can support with the size that we've got and the budgets that we've got as well.
So what sort of impact does it have on the local economy?
Pretty good. If you go by Visit Scotland's economic impact regulator, it's something like $750,000 or something, and it's in Dumfries and Galloway, and so I think we've got one of the lowest wage economies in Scotland. So it also brings in lots of people from other parts of Scotland, but also across the UK and also across the world. Like we actually have people flying in from abroad because it's become like an annual event for them, and it sort of lowers the age of tourists in the region, because generally it tends to be more people of retired age that come to that area. But our festival brings in a lot of younger people, so that's quite healthy as well.
It's been going for 19 years.
Yeah.
Is that a kind of family-run thing?
It is, yeah. It's held on the small holding that I grew up on, so it's just a wee patch of land, like about 30 acres, sort of 10 miles from the nearest village, and I don't live there anymore, but my parents still live there.
So you've kind of grown up with festival?
Yeah, kind of.
How?
I wasn't that young, but I started.
All right, okay. I'm trying to be nice here. So tell me this: how have festivals changed in that intervening period? When I was younger, and I'm clearly some distance older than you, when I was younger, going to a festival was kind of a left field thing to do.
Yeah.
Now it's like, everybody does it.
It's a rite of passage.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. It's totally changed in Scotland. When we started, we were one of the first. We were the only ones, sorry. And there was Tea in the Park started like a year or two before us, which is a bit of a different ball game. It's a lot bigger and kind of more mainstream. But you're right. Nowadays, there's like festivals every weekend in Scotland. You can find one, sometimes more than one on a weekend, all across the length of breadth, up from the Hebrides right down to the borders. And yeah, it's like the thing to do, you get these big chain shops and they've got that's the fashion of the year, is festival fashion.
Yeah.
And it's like, get your festival wellies, get your festival outfits together, and it's just what...
I mean, Hunter's wellies totally reinvented themselves on the back of festivals.
Yeah. It just makes me laugh that wellies was the first thing that you said, because it's clearly Scotland.
Yeah.
It's West
Go figure.
Scotland.
We're going to hear from one of the acts that's coming on. Would you like to introduce Loki?
Yeah, so Loki's a spoken word artist and rapper based in Glasgow, and we actually put him on next to a couple of other sort of rappers from other parts of the world that also talk about social and cultural issues in their area. And so we brought a guy from Syria, we programmed a guy from Syria and a guy from Western Sahara, and then we want to bring it all back home and go, let's talk about some of the issues here as well through the same medium, which is a really powerful medium. So yeah, Loki.
So, Loki. So you want to do your thing, Loki, and then we'll maybe have a brief chat after it?
Okay, cool, brilliant. It's nice to be here in the Yes Bar, the heart of the movement, the belly of the beast, the underactive thyroid of constitutional politics. My name is Darren McGarvey. I also humbly operate under the moniker of Loki, which is a god. And I had a cameo role in the Yes campaign. A lot of people think I'm arrogant, but they're idiots. Some people say that I'm egotistical, but when you consider how talented I am, then I think my false humility is perfectly pitched. In fact, I don't think I get enough credit for how humble I am. I actually met Nicola Sturgeon. And she told me to keep speaking truth to power. So I told her to have a word with herself. I'm going to perform for you something that doesn't have as much swear words in it as what normally I would perform. And it's called the class ceiling. Class, of course, being the thing that we used to talk about. Walked into a dental hospital, screaming I had sore teeth, with a wham bar stuck to my forehead, smoking a clove leaf, spitting rotted molars in a bloody sink. You're hurting me! Stopped trying to light a cigarette during surgery. Since the youngest age, I was always threatening to run away, but social mobility isn't what they say. Stuck at a red light in my tricycle, thinking, stuff them! While a bunch of West Enders whizzed past me in the bus lane. How come it's bright in this posh park, but in Pollock it's dark? Probably because the sun isn't shining at everybody's arse. Vegetarians lecture me to buy local while they're sneering at the Glasgow dialect and my vocals. My woman's asking me, do you wish I looked more like her? Can I tell you I haven't seen her for the front? Apart from that, nothing's going on here locally except an off sales masquerading as a grocery. All the shops are shutting since the new Tesco's getting built. Thought I'd check it out, went in sceptical. Had to walk 20 miles just to get some bread and milk. Then got diverted at the checkout by a clothing section. Ended up flipping out, bought some pens, Pepsi, a lilt, a Craftmatic adjustable bed, a lamp, a feathered quilt, a pair of stilettos, salt and pepper, a kilt, a pair of stilts. The first person to mention my free will is getting killed. Luckily, there's a pretty woman sitting on the edge of the till offering me instant loans to help me with my credit bills. That's twisted. I warned her I was ham-fisted, but she says I'm eligible. despite the fact I'm blacklisted. She says if I just drop my attitude and lighten up, then I could get a proper job, just like her. She said it takes some time to think about the things worth fighting for. I dropped the shopping bags and started fighting her. The answer to every question is get a job. In this building site you call society, I function as a world-class wrecking ball. Bravado helps me hide the fact that I feel less than all the ineffectual dross peddled by these intellectual snobs. Stuff your metaphors. Shut the door in my face, you got a firework through your letterbox. So much as step on my lawn. The next middle class arse that tells me to calm down is getting letter bombed. What do you mean this verse is long and that you need a choral section every 12th of the song to stop you from heading off? I wrote this very song perched on the edge of thought, watching deserts form. And your only comment was the swearing's raw, or the fact I'm mispronouncing Renaissance. Well, I look across the river at you sipping your Pims, wishing that I was as addicted to yoga, swimming in gyms as I am to chicken dippers, Lidl's crisps and 70 million minute Sims. Bingo wings over Scotland. This is a little grim, cloaking all my illicit sins in an insignificant rhythmic din. No bad for a kid that used to live in a bin. In truth, I'm sitting here on Twitter in my pants with 7 chins. Thank you.
I'm glad that was one of the less sweary ones.
Yes, it was indeed.
I want to talk a wee bit about, with both of you, this is a festival, I guess it's true to call it an alternative festival.
Yeah.
Kat, what's an alternative to?
Tea in the park.
Explain.
Well, I guess we don't put our acts on just because we're going to sell tickets. Like, obviously we want to sell tickets, and so we put acts on that people are going to like and people are going to come to see. But also we might put on acts that we think are like really great that maybe haven't been so discovered yet. So it's a really good place to discover new stuff. It's a really good place to try things that you maybe wouldn't have tried listening to and find that you actually like kind of this stuff. So we maybe push people just very gently a little bit out their comfort zone, so they come to hear stuff that they really like and then they discover loads of new stuff and go away raving about what they found. So I think we're able to be a bit more wide with our sort of artistic programming maybe, because we're not just about the commercial and about selling the tickets, but you've got to get that balance. So
yeah. For you as a performer, there's a political aspect to that. When we say alternative, does the word alternative carry political connotations?
I mean, I guess it could if you want to interpret it like that. Everything that I do at the minute, even if I don't intend it to be, it does have a political dimension to it, just because we are living in quite a politicised environment, you know, so there's always a political angle on everything. I guess what these smaller festivals offer is an opportunity for people to go and broaden their cultural horizons a little bit. You know, there's a sort of streamlined version of Scottish culture, Tea in the Park, and it's very much sort of you're bringing all the international acts in and giving some of the local acts a platform to perform as well. But there's more. I wouldn't want to say obscure. A lot of the people that will be performing at Knockengorrock will have massive fan bases globally, but they might not be the first artists that come to mind when you think about certain genres of music. Yeah. And apart from that, while there will be obviously a hedonistic dimension to the festival, that's not the focus. There's not a relentless consumerism going on. There's a sort of sit back and chill. There's tents where you can go and chill. There's very much try to promote an atmosphere of all of this music's here to encourage well-being and community, and that's the thing that the festival unites around, as opposed to how much money it can make.
Is that family appropriate? Would you take your
well,
one?
I'm performing there with my partner, and we'll be taking our son there with us, who will be 12 weeks old when we get there. So obviously we won't be staying over, but we'll be there, and it's not a festival that I've been to or that I remember going to, but
Are there many festivals you don't remember?
Well, I'm sober now, but it wasn't always the case. But what I do know about Knockengorrock is similar to like Kilburn Garden Party, Audio Soup, Down the Rabbit Hole. Knockengorrock's one of the bigger festivals now. It's been going for a long time, so it has a really good reputation as a safe environment, which is extremely important for festivals and for young people going to festivals to feel safe. Often it's that fear that's not safe that creates a kind of environment that's fertile for violence, like you were referring to earlier. So when you go there and people feel confident and safe and there's not a massive police presence, and people feel quite comfortable and chilled out, and that just makes for a brilliant few days in the countryside.
Good.
Can I ask about, just before we move on, can I ask about your rapper in residence role with the Violence Reduction Unit?
Certainly.
Tell me about that. I read that yesterday and thought, wow.
That's been going on now for about 7 months. So basically it has so far has involved me basically doing what I've been doing, but in a more formal capacity with the Violence Reduction Unit, which is a body that was set up by the Scottish Government many years back that had a remit in Glasgow to look at the cultural dimension of violence, the culture that permits violence, you've referred to earlier on, and trying to find ways to engage some of the young people that are perhaps could be argued are on a spectrum of entering the criminal justice system because of acts of violence. And so my job really is to try and make some of that very dry academic, although frightening reality a wee bit more palatable to the people that need to hear the message.
Yeah.
So it's about tackling this idea that there's a virtue to violence, it's about tackling this concept that men have to be macho, that sensitivity is a weakness. You know, with the football, what we see is football is a working class tradition. Unfortunately, so is violence. So it's out of poverty that a lot of these social problems come. Violence Reduction Unit is set up to look at some of those tougher questions, some of the taboo dimension to violence, what causes it. And hip hop has always been associated with violence, and that's because it emerged out of the same kind of communities in America as what we have here. So when people look at rap and they say, oh, they're all talking about violence and guns all the time, what they're doing is they're reporting. They function as the journalists of the boroughs in New York. And
that's talking about their reality.
Exactly, exactly. And obviously it's a wee bit vulgar for people who are not exposed to that reality, but for a lot of people that is a reality. And the great thing that the VRU have done is not only had a hand in seeing a reduction in many of the forms of violence, including massive reductions in the gang violence and just gang culture generally, although some might argue gang culture is actually an absence of culture. We could talk about that another day. But ultimately, it's money very well spent in terms of the Scottish Government, and it's good to see that it's continuing to be supported for the work that it does, and hopefully I can contribute to that in some small way.
Good.
Well done.
Thank you.
Good. Before we bring this part of the show to a close, could you just give us some details about the show, about the festival?
Yeah.
It's on this weekend coming?
It's this weekend.
Starts on what night?
Thursday the 26th of May.
Yeah.
It's in Dumfries and Galloway.
It's Thursday, Friday, Saturday and Sunday,
yeah.
Is that right?
It's 4 days, but you
days?
can come on Friday or Saturday if you don't want to do the full 4 days.
Okay.
I recommend pacing yourself if you come for the full 4 days, because people come on the Thursday and then they're like, get so excited that they're at this beautiful place in May.
How'd you find it?
Best to go on the website.
Right, okay. You're not going to give directions here.
I'm not going to give directions.
Too long.
It's going to take quite a while.
Yeah.
But it's about an hour and a half, hour 20 minutes drive from Glasgow. So
right.
It's really not as far, but it's sort of in the hills a wee bit. So
okay.
It might look further than it is.
Great. Well, Kat, Dan, thank you very much indeed
for
coming on today.
Great.
Right.
Thank you. So we're now moving on to invite Gordon MacIntyre-Kemp onto the stage. Gordon is founder and CEO of Business for Scotland. Welcome.
Hi. Cheers. Glad to be here.
How you doing?
So, first of all, the announcement this week, the Cabinet reshuffle, the splitting of roles between finance and economy. Good for Scottish business?
Yeah, I think it can be. It really all depends on what sort of policies come out of it. I think a lot of people were surprised to see John Swinney actually moving. And I kind of heard about it on the grapevine a couple of days beforehand and thought somebody was making a joke. And then when it happened, I thought, oh, that's interesting. But in terms of the roles kind of like now split into three, if you like, and the role that Paul Wheelhouse has, which people are saying is like a sort of business secretary, sort of Westminster terms, that could be very interesting. And if you're going to move the actual full sort of business and finance role and actually have somebody focusing on business, you've got to say, well, okay, let's get more of a focus on business. Let's actually think about what sort of policies, innovative policies, can actually put in place. And I think that the SNP as a government have always had a very steady as she goes sort of gradualist and not too radical a set of policies. I think there's now, with a few more powers, but actually more importantly with the lack of powers that weren't transferred, such as corporation tax, etc., they've got to start saying, well, how can we, with such a limited range of powers, drive Scotland's economy forward? And they're going to have to be radical, or they're going to fail. So hopefully that will open up a lot of opportunities.
One of the things that Business for Scotland did recently was call for a Minister for SME growth.
Yeah.
Do you think the kind of remit of that will be reflected somehow in these new roles that we've got?
Well, yeah, I mean, the reason we asked for a Minister for SMEs is because SMEs dominate the Scottish business scene. They are about 40% of private sector turnover and about 55% of private sector employment as well. So if you're looking for an area where new, fresh policy approaches could actually grow Scotland's economy, then it's there. Because if you can help SMEs, either with their cash flow, with innovation, research and development, upskilling, etc., if you can help SMEs improve that, then they'll actually employ more people for every percentage point of growth they get. Whereas large companies, well, they're investing in automation. They're getting rid of the humans from the process because they're the most expensive. But if you can create a highly innovative SME economy who are creating added value products, then you need more people and more skills, and it also more highly skilled people get paid more. So I think the fact that we've had, the UK as a whole has had a focus on big companies as the sort of like the be-all and end-all of economic policy, it's had a couple of pretty poor impacts. First of all, we see big companies put downward pressure on wages. That slows the economy down if people are earning less. We can see big companies being even, angry about George Osborne's fake living wage, which is not going the full way, and so they make profits, and then they manage to spirit the profits out of the country and avoid tax, etc. So I think it's now flipped, if you like, that if you look at the last 20 years of focusing on big companies to try and establish growth, the next 20 years have to be looking at small to medium-sized companies who are actually the ones that are the real backbone of Scotland's economy, the real wealth creators, the real job creators of the future, and they'll pay their taxes and they'll hire people and they'll pay people better wages. So I think the focus on that could actually start to differentiate economic policy in Scotland versus economic policy in the rest of the UK in a way that a lot of people will look at Scotland and go, that's the way to do it, that's good.
How did you interpret the cabinet reshuffle in terms of the moving of Swinney away from that? Was that simply, he's our main man, she's said I will be defined by education, so therefore she's going to put her main man into that area, or was there something else at play there?
Well, I was surprised when I started to hear the rumours. I guess with the Scottish Parliament getting more powers, even though they're very limited powers and limited only to personal taxation, which is a trap in itself because it's the most unpopular thing to move and the most difficult thing to move downwards, etc. But if you take more money out of people's pockets, it's going to be unpopular. So it's a limited amount of powers, but it was more powers going to that really important government role. And therefore, I just naturally assumed that John Swinney would carry on.
Yeah, I think lots of people thought that. I thought that.
Yeah, but I think it basically shows, I think, that by putting the Paul Wheelhouse position in there, it does open up a new focus, a new avenue, and I'd like to see policies. For instance, the Scottish Government has a rule of all SMEs get paid within 10 days. Some people tell me that doesn't always happen, but actually local councils are thought to be the worst late payers. We've also see the NHS being a bad payer, and big companies are bad payers. So actually, it's the late payment is probably the one area that I would like to see the business minister look at, and I'd like to see some sort of legislation or even some sort of benefit given to people to actually pay earlier. Because on average, I think it's about £79,000 is what every SME is owed at any point. in late payments, and that's payment that's gone over 30 days. And it's the single biggest factor that slows growth in businesses. Now, if you look at SMEs, some 70% of them say that if they were paid on time, just on time, not early, but paid on time, then that would improve the cash flow and that would allow the businesses to grow. So if you have such a huge swathe of companies across the country, geographically right across Scotland, who all think they could grow, about half of them thought they could grow by between 5 up to 5%, but 25% thought they would grow between up to 10%. But 7%, who turned out to be the largest respondents to the survey that we've done in Business for Scotland, people with several hundred staff, they're the ones that thought they could grow 20%. So it's a huge economic opportunity to create cash flow through the economy, because if a big company doesn't pay a small company, and the small company therefore has to hold off and be a late payer to its suppliers, and so late payment spreads to the whole of our economy like a virus. And if we can stop that, and we're not saying special conditions, we're actually saying people just agree to meet the contracts they've actually signed to, or there will be fines, etc. Then I think we could actually really kickstart the SME side of our economy. It's the single biggest growth opportunity, and I hope they focus on that.
Keith Brown and Mackay, are they the kind of people that business would be able to have a relationship with?
Absolutely, definitely. I mean, I've spoken to Mackay about SMEs on many occasions. I'm very, very capable man, very clever, very interesting, and really interested. And we spoke at length, and him and I had a bit of a chat about it previously, and he in particular was very keen to find a way, albeit with limited powers. We were talking earlier about to incentivise small and medium enterprises on being able to, those that want to pay the living wage, and I find that extremely difficult. There is a goodwill out there for people, small businesses, certainly I know my own trade, to do the right thing, and sometimes not being able to. And Derek understands that, and he was right in there, bang on, and got the point. So there's a depth of feeling and empathy towards small businesses that's definitely there.
Gordon?
Yeah, there's also a sort of irony, if you like, in that during the independence referendum, I think that there was a corporation tax cut was one of the few sort of strong business ideas in the white paper, and Business for Scotland supported that, but it was again not that ambitious. Now, if you were actually to look at what George Osborne's done, he's actually now having told us that would be bad for business, etc., and it was a race to the bottom. They've now in the last budget decided to cut corporation tax. Well, my view is that we shouldn't be cutting corporation tax because it mainly applies to large companies. What we should be, I guess it's because so many large companies are actually spiriting the profits out of the country and not paying tax on them. This might encourage them, make it easier for them to declare. But I think that's a negative way to look at it. What you should do is you'd say, well, what do we want big companies to actually do? We want them to come where young people want to pay the living wage. We want them to invest in skills. We want them we want companies to export more in particular. Maybe companies, we want them to have more employee engagement and spend more of their turnover, or a higher percentage of the turnover on research and development, which will boost our economy overall. And if you think, well, if these are the sort of behaviours we want, then don't cut corporation tax, but give them rebates based on behaviours. Allow them to earn that 30% cut, or that 3% cut, by actually behaving in ways that drive our economy forward. Mm-hmm. Now, we obviously don't have Northern Ireland is getting the power over corporation tax, but Scotland isn't. And I think that what the Scottish Government needs to do on business policy and economic policy is actually to say, well, okay, this is what we are going to do, but here's actually what we could do if we had more powers. Put it to vote in the Scottish Parliament, and it's just let people be aware of what we could do if we had all the right fiscal levers to actually drive our economy forward.
Incentivising good behaviour again. I mean, that comes down to a few things that we've been talking about today. Is and again, what I was just saying, I couldn't agree with you more, Gordon. I mean, in my own business here, I really take pains. I would try to do everything the right way, pay the taxes, pay the wages, no zero. You try and try and try, to a great detriment, and it certainly puts us at a disadvantage with others in the area. I mean, I have to charge quite dramatically more prices than the bar across the road, for example. So I would like to see good behaviour incentivised all over through the whole Scottish economy, and as well as a detriment to those who won't do it properly.
When we're talking about good behaviour, I don't mean
pay your taxes.
Well, yeah, but other ways that businesses do. There's good economic behaviour that helps the economy. Where there's good moral behaviour. For instance, don't raid pension funds, etc. Can the Scottish Government, how can the Scottish Government, with the current, with the new powers it's getting, can it really influence moral behaviour of business?
Well, I don't think that necessarily, if you're actually looking to where are the areas for regulations that will affect the moral behaviour, I think we've got to look at a pan-European basis. Now, for instance, if you see the way people are actually using back charging to take profits out of the country into European states, whether it be in the EU or not, where corporation tax is lower, etc. If you want to look at the banks' behaviours, and if you want to actually stop another financial crisis in terms of looking at how banks behave, how they invest, how they're regulated, then doing it in one country doesn't tend to work. You need to actually look across the whole of Europe, in fact globally, but I think Europe's a good place to start. But I think in terms of Scotland alone, there is, if the Scottish Government starts to point out the behaviours that it wants, and it has done in this business pledge to a certain extent, but not an awful lot of people know about that, not an awful lot of business people know about that. I think it could be marketed a lot better.
Marketed by the Scottish Government?
By the Scottish Government, yeah.
Right.
And I think it should also not be a standalone thing. It should be something that they sign up business networks, all sorts of business networks, regardless of their political views to, and just get that message going through networks of business people that this is how Scottish businesses are expected to behave. Because when we survey business people in Scotland, we ask questions, what would you really like to see happen, and you see even the people who you know to be Tory voters are talking about fairness and sustainability and shared prosperity, because they understand that if everyone is wealthier, then their business will have more customers. Whereas if you look at the sort of typical neoclassical economic approach which drives the City of London, then it's all about, the economy is all about money, and there's no altruistic thing. So I think what we're looking at, there has been a cultural change in Scotland. I think we just need to keep pushing that forward. I don't know how we can necessarily legislate, but you can encourage through targeted tax rebates or grants, etc., in certain areas.
You mentioned EU in that part of the conversation, and I know you've done a lot of research into the costs of leaving versus remaining, and there's lots of debate out there about it'll cost more to leave, it'll cost more to stay, but your research, which was verified by academics, showed that Scotland benefits to the tune of about £2 billion a year.
About £2 billion a year in terms
from
of
being in the EU.
From being in the from being in the EU and having full access to the common market. Now, essentially, we're told that you've got the bus, the Leave bus driving around with 350 million a day written on the side. Well, that's just not the case. Because the actual membership fee for the whole of the UK is about 18 billion, but you have to take away the 4.5 billion of EU spend, the money we get back. You also have to take away the 4.9 billion of rebate that we get. Now, because it's named a rebate, it's a bit of an oxymoron. Basically, what happens is that other nations pay it on our behalf, so we never pay that, and the Leave campaign know that. So, I'd criticise them for spinning that number ridiculously. The actual real total is about £10,000 million less than they're claiming. Still an awful lot of money to join, but we do get a lot back. But the media that we're getting, because we've had the Scottish elections, there's no real focus on Europe from a Scottish perspective. So the media we see is mainly London driven. They look at what the cost for the whole of the UK is, and it kind of assumes that right across the whole of the UK that a Brexit would impact on all parts of the UK in exactly the same way. when it really definitely wouldn't. Wales and Northern Ireland, for instance, end up getting more cash, actually in cash terms, in terms of grants, back from the EU than their share of the membership. In Scotland, it's once you've actually taken away, because we pay 8.8% of the population percentage share of the membership fee, but we get 17.5% of the EU spending in the UK, so they give us £781 million back against about 1.1 billion. So once you've taken away the aid element of about 67 million, about 110 million of private, of grants for research and development to private companies away, you actually find that in a very conservative, and my number's higher than most people get to, but in a conservative figure is it costs Scotland £97 million a year to be a member of the EU, to have access to the common market. That drives about 7 billion of our GDP and about 2 billion of government revenue. So for every pound we give the EU in Scotland, we get 20 back. Deal or no deal. It seems like a good deal. But the thing is that if we then leave, then you'd actually hope that Westminster would then say, okay, see all these grants, all these contributions to your roads and communications, etc. We're going to replace all of that, despite the fact that they've got a track record of trying to take 7 billion out of our budget for giving us more powers. People have to decide whether they trust them to do that. But the money's not there, because if you do a Norway-style trade deal, Norway doesn't have any MEPs, doesn't get any grants, but still has to pay 95%. A figure worth 95% of our membership in order to have full access to the European Union. So there's actually no saving. They also have to follow all the regulations and have all the immigration. So there's no saving, there's no immigration benefit if you're a Leave campaigner, that's one of the things that drives you. And given you have to follow all the regulations and actually don't have any MEPs, you lose sovereignty, not gain it. So I don't understand where they're coming from. It wouldn't benefit Scotland at all. And I think that if people actually understand what the EU's role in terms of redistributing the wealth of London and the South East to Scotland, Northern Ireland and Wales is, they'd be an awful lot more positive about it.
How do you get that message over? I mean, is that the purpose of Business for Scotland's research, to show that this is what's happening in Scotland? But should that be your job, or should somebody else be coordinating that?
We're a campaigning business network with 4,000 members. It's what we do. We do research. We try and move arguments on. We try and influence all parties. Our members, actually, when they support something, 82% of our members are pro-EU. I'd like to move that upwards. They want us to campaign on these things. They want us to bring a business and economics dynamic to these arguments that maybe politicians don't have the time to do, or don't have the resources, the research ability to do. All over the world, politicians look to think tanks for cutting edge ideas, and they pick from each of them as menus. In Scotland, politicians seem to do all the thinking themselves, and you could say, well, actually, overall we do quite a good job, or have done, but really I think that having a campaigning business group that sees the big picture and isn't just about money, CBI, for instance, but is actually about Scottish business culture, encouraging entrepreneurship, but also shared prosperity, and sees the big picture in that respect is a very good thing. So that's what we exist to do, is to bring that dimension to the debate.
Okay, the role of business in the European referendum, as it was in the independence referendum, is a controversial area. And James Dornan, Glasgow MSP, he wants to know given that David Cameron has admitted trying to influence businesses to tell their members to vote a certain way in the EU referendum, did they do the same, and to what extent did they do the same in the independence referendum? So if we could welcome to the stage James Dornan to talk about that.
Thank you very much.
Yes, so what do you want Cameron to tell you?
The truth. I mean, I know this is a new concept and it's not likely to happen very quickly, but it would be really interesting just to find out who it was that Cameron admitted that they had contacted during the Scottish independence referendum, and what sort of pressure was put on them. And it's important for a number of reasons. I mean, one is that hopefully it might dispel some of the conspiracy myths that we get around about it, but the other fact is that we've got a government here that is meant to represent the whole of the United Kingdom, and tells us that we are better together, we're all part of the same family, and at the same time is, excuse my language, but is shafting part of that family to keep the rest of the family in the style that they've become accustomed to. This is just not a way that a Prime Minister of any country should be behaving. So I've written to him and I've asked him to give me a list of the companies that they contacted before, and what sort of pressure was put on them, because as I said in this leaked letter, they admit that they did it and that they managed to garner a lot of publicity, and that publicity could only have been damaging to our cause.
Mm-hmm. Here's the thing, for people that support staying in Europe, then you're thinking, well, Cameron's kind of arguing our case. No,
he's arguing our case because we have the same end result. We have the same aim, right? But he's not arguing our case in a way that we would argue the case. We would argue the case for staying in Europe as being one of where we benefit. We benefit through human rights, we benefit through workers' rights, we benefit from that whole market of business that's available there. But we are not, I mean, Gordon had just talked about, or yourself earlier on had talked about, at this stage the SNP has been fairly quiet because we've been focused on the Scottish elections, but it was clear from National Council yesterday that we're now going to be starting to speak much more. Our voice will be a much more positive case for staying within the EU, as opposed to what we're getting just now is that fierce tactics and the scare tactics and the threatening and bullying tactics that we're seeing from Cameron and the Westminster government.
Mm-hmm. So basically you're unhappy with the way the debate has been carried out hitherto?
I have to be honest, if I have my view, I would like to remain, but if I was coming to this from a completely neutral perspective and I looked at both camps, I'd be thinking, a curse on both of you, because there has not been one positive case made yet for either remaining or leaving in this debate so far. It's been a dreadful debate.
But that's Cameron's goal, isn't it? Though he wants to people to look at it and go, curse on both of you, because then they're not motivated, right, and they vote for the status quo. Right. It's an interesting psychological thing though here that occurred to me just the other night as I was talking about this, is that obviously we had the scaremongering during the independence referendum, and Scottish people, you know, they're said to be a cringe, a lack of confidence in our nation. These things I can sort of see, I can relate to. And there's been a lot of research that backs that up. So scaremongering worked in the referendum. A lot of people. I was at Kevin Bridges' concert, and he said when I try and explain it to people from abroad, they go, "Why didn't you vote for independence?" He said it was quite complicated because people were a bit worried the prices in Asda might go up. You know, and we're just hearing that again today in the papers about, you know, the same sort of thing. But the question is, okay, it worked in Scotland. I spent a lot of time living in London and the South East. Would it work down there? They're an awful lot more confident in us. I don't, as a nation, it's going to be interesting to see if there's a cultural difference in how scaremongering actually applies.
See, one of the most vile parts of the Project Fear during the independence debates to me was, one part of it was if you don't know, vote no. And then rather than if you don't know, educate yourself. You know, if you don't know, educate yourself. But the thing is that, as you say, the status quo, Cameron and co welcome an uneducated, politically apathetic group of people, and then they can do exactly whatever they want. That's, you know, to me that seems to be very much the case, and that's what they wanted to be. And yes, I was actually born out of Project Fair. Definitely, you know, it was born out of an anger, and it was literally the morning of the John Lewis CEO's chat, and we decided no more. You know, we're going to no. This is a nonsense. This is an absolute nonsense, and it's why we changed our name. Was a direct result of Project Fair.
I would suggest that 56 SNP MPs were born out of Project Fair, because I accept what you say, Gordon, that it worked to the extent that they got across the line. But we did come from something like 27-28% to 45%. Yeah. So although there was a lack of confidence to take us right over the line, there was enough confidence for enough people to see that the goal was right and that we could move towards it. And I mean, this is why this sort of thing is really important, because if we can get to the truth of the matter, and if we can find out, or we can prove that the Westminster government was, whilst they were saying that we were all equal partners, although we've seen since then that was a complete nonsense, that they were doing underhand deals, putting pressure on businesses, blackmailing them into putting out press releases and stuff like that, then that can only help us when we do come round to having that second referendum in the future.
Will Project Fear work a second time?
No, it's gone. If you look at all of the promises that were made that haven't been delivered, if you look at all of the things we were told would happen that have happened anyway, especially if you look at the Aberdeen City deal, where they told us that, well, if the oil price falls, you need the broad shoulders of the UK. Well, the oil price went down beyond anyone's expectations. Nobody was predicting what actually happened and the UK's broad shoulders just shrugged. And Aberdeen economy is in a state right now. I think it was £125 million they put into the city deal, from Westminster, and the Scottish Government 2 or 3 times that. I think people are actually realising that all the scaremongering was untruthful, that the promises are not delivered. What they're also still stuck on is the affordability. They want to see a roadmap to prosperity with the powers of independence. They want to see the SNP deliver another term, and then you'll see slowly as they do, if we can see these new business ministers start to deliver policies that people can believe in, and people will start to believe in the affordability, and you will see support for independence start to grow.
I would agree with that. I think that what has to happen here is that I think that they've bottomed out, right? They can't go any lower. Nobody likes in terms of Project Fear. I don't think that can work again. And I think that where people are now is they just need to be sure that it's worth it. And I think that the next 5 years will show quite clearly that it's worth it. We've already done that. I mean, Scotland, in many ways, it looks like a nicer place to be than some parts of the rest of the UK. You see some of the language around about the European referendum and stuff like that. Scotland seems a much better place to be than some of the other places.
Let me put forward an alternative view. Not so much about independence for Scotland, but to go back to the EU referendum and the Project Fear. We know in Scotland, we know all about Project Fear. We know what happened, we know the tactics, we know the arguments, and we know that they were wrong, and we know all the lies behind them. We know all that. People in England don't know any of that. They've never seen it. This is all new to them. And although we can recognise interjections as the same kind of interjections that were made in the Scottish independence referendum, they don't have any of that hinterland. They don't have any of that info. So Project Fear, your question, can it work? Maybe it will work in the EU referendum because people in England don't know anything about it.
Gordon doesn't seem to think it will work in places like London, and it might have a case, but it could well work in some of the other parts of the country, like the north of England, and that very similar to Scotland in many ways, and be getting the same kind of arguments and the same kind of ridiculous scare stories and the same kind of fears that are put to them, and it could well work there.
Because your plea for a more positive campaign, I have to say, has been made by many people for many months, and that bus hasn't come yet.
The trouble is that Cameron actually called for this referendum as a political tactic, seeing UKIP support rise, understanding a lot of his own party were dubious about the EU, and I actually wrote one of my articles, which I believe was from your newspaper in 2014, that if before the general election, if Labour don't also offer an EU referendum, then in the last 2 weeks all the UKIP people will realise they're going nowhere. They have to vote Tory to get the referendum, and that will give a Tory majority. And everybody thought, oh, that's not going to happen, and it's exactly what happened. And so Cameron also thought that he would then easily walk an EU referendum, but he's miscalculated on that. It's a little bit more difficult, and nobody can tell what's happening in England. The polls are 50-50. But their population is so big that unless there's a lower than a 1% difference, then the votes in Scotland, if say we were to vote 65% in Ireland, the votes they can be just completely swamped by the size of the English population. But my fear is that people aren't that interested in this, and I've gone all over Scotland to give talks in the EU, and it's not necessarily something that people are jumping about. They're really interested in just yet. The media is not giving it the coverage it deserves, and I think that if people are not that excited about it, George Square's not going to be filled on the 24th with people waving EU flags. If people aren't that excited, they might not turn out to vote. Younger people are more pro-EU. They're less likely to vote than the older people who aren't. I think we could be in for a shock in the UK. I think that if it's 50-50 on polling day, that's what I think the Brexit's got it. And as I say, managed well. That's the thing. Managed well. It's not a Brexit isn't going to start World War III. It won't crash our economy. It will probably, over a period of time, start to slow our economy, and job creation will slow, and you'll start to notice the economy tail off. There might be a little bit of trouble for a short period of time, certainly the pound dropping, but the pound dropping is not actually necessarily a bad thing if your economy exports like Scotland does. But I think if there is no compensation for Scotland, and there is for the lack of EU grants that we get post-Brexit, and if there is no professionally managed access, tariff-free access to the European market for Scottish exporters, then actually, just as we do extremely well out of Europe in terms of grants, in terms of the balance of our membership versus benefits, we do extremely badly compared to everybody else if it was managed badly. And I don't think that Prime Minister Boris Johnson's going to give a damn about Scotland once he's had a Brexit and takes over. But that said, I think it's still up in the air right now as to what the result's going to be.
Let's look at its implications for Scottish independence then. Does anybody here still believe, or ever believe, that England voting to leave, Scotland voting to stay, is a trigger in itself for a new referendum?
Can I say I don't think that in itself has ever been. I think that and I think the point, to be fair, that the First Minister has always made is that she reckons that would sort of like raise the ire of many people, right, and maybe start to have a clamour for a second referendum. But Nicola's never said that this would be on its own the trigger for the second referendum. If Scotland overwhelmingly votes to remain and the UK votes to leave, then I do think that there'll be this feeling that once again we'll be left behind, in the slipstream of others. But on its own, unless the public show that this is the one, then there won't be a second referendum. In my view, there won't be a second referendum just because of Brexit.
Suzanne, would you expect the public to show that?
I think, a little. I think there will be. I mean, if we vote dramatically, if Scotland and I don't like Gordon. I don't think there is enough excitement. Most people are just kind of that I'm speaking to, and this is some of the most political. But
the plan was to have it just right after Scottish Parliament elections, and then there's no time to build up a head steam.
Exactly. But I don't. But yet again, it would be yet another example of Middle England decide what happens to Scotland, and that in itself certainly is pushes my buttons. Here we go again. It was stay with us. It'll all be different. Here we go again. No, it's not. So. In that case,
it may well.
But Gordon, you're trying. Gordon, you're doing research. You're making the argument. You're making the case.
Well, we've put videos out there talking about our research in the last couple of weeks. Had about 16,000 views in total. But I think there's a poll out today that shows that people don't think it should be a trigger in itself. But that's because we're not thinking about it. You're asking people how they're going to react to something. And quite often how you react to something is quite different afterwards. And I think that if we get a situation where the Scottish elections are out of the way, I really genuinely hope that Nicola Sturgeon, as the new First Minister, now says right and makes, with Hamza Yousaf, who I think is in charge of the EU campaign now, goes out there and puts a positive case together. And sends a message to their supporters in particular. I'd like to see the other leaders do it as well, although not as Willie Rennie says in a better together style. That's just ridiculous. But if Nicola now actually starts to put sort of research out there that shows how much better we are off within the EU, then I think if the Brexit then happened when people had actually got a handle on what the EU actually can mean, how good it can be for Scotland as compared to the rest of the UK or the UK as a whole, then I think they'd react differently to it. So what will happen in the next 3 or 4 weeks is going to be pretty major in terms of how people will react, and we won't know until afterwards. But also, I don't think that it's so much the EU people would be bothered about. It would be the fact that we voted wholeheartely for something and then. So it's actually democracy, not the EU, that would be the trigger for an upsurgence. But if you were to see that happen, and I'm campaigning for the UK to stay in the EU, and the reason I'm doing that is because it would be disingenuous to campaign for Scotland and to hope there's because actually I think that if we can put together a roadmap to prosperity, believable economic plans with the powers of independence, then it's only a matter of 2 or 3 years before the population of Scotland will actually move to 55-60% supporting independence anyway. So that's something we're working on full time. If this new set up in terms of finance and business and infrastructure can deliver exciting, better policies and cherry pick some of the things that think tanks and organisations like Business for Scotland are putting forward, then I think we'll see by 2020, we'll see another Conservative majority government coming in, probably, I would guess, headed up by Boris Johnson, and we'll have seen whether or not we've had a Brexit or not could impact significantly badly on us. But I think even without that, by that point, I think people have had time to adjust to the affordability of independence, to the actual increased prosperity it can deliver, and I think we should be looking at, potentially that's the earliest, we'll be looking at a second referendum.
I would be there in terms of timing. I just don't think there's anything, you can never tell the future, right, but I just can't see there'd be anything that would trigger something that was going to be happening before.
I think what could happen though, and we were talking about it earlier, is catalysing the yes movement again. So if we are taken out of the EU against our will, then there's more motivation for all those pro-Indy groups to get back together again and start working together and educating and sharing the information that they've gathered and supporting each other and having those conversations on a regular basis, so it doesn't then become suddenly, and I know there's been conversations that have gone on for 2, 3, 4 years.
Could we try and nail what we think a timescale is? If I'm interpreting everybody correctly, I guess the more mainstream opinion seems to be that Brexit by itself wouldn't be a trigger, but that we could be faced with, having had Brexit, then we could be faced with a Tory government again. In fact, actually, we could be faced with a never-ending series of Tory governments, so the prospect of that, and so therefore we've got a whole series of elections of which we vote one way, and the rest of the UK votes another way. So that is going to be the situation where it's more likely that we're going to get another referendum, and that's probably going to be not sooner than 5 years.
I think 2020 is the first real opportunity, because then you'd actually be asking yourself, the next Scottish election is going to be in 2021, because it's going to be put back a year again because of the Fixed Term Parliament Act. So basically you'd be looking at who would then lead the No campaign. Well, would Labour lead a no campaign just before going into another Holyrood election? I don't think so. So it would have to be the Tories. And this is the beauty of the Conservatives coming second. And it's like coming way second. They got thumped. All that happened is that Labour reversed past them into third place.
It didn't move that far forward.
No.
It sort of stood still.
No.
But the good v evil, if you like, forces are very much.
I wouldn't call it. I would.
I'm not using that phrase.
No, well, I was brought up in Hexham in Northumberland, which has always been a Tory town until very, very recently. So I thought maybe a slightly different view. I wasn't brought up in Glasgow, but essentially it does look now as though you've got the SNP versus the Tories in Westminster as the sort of main working opposition in Westminster, and you've also got SNP versus the Tories here. That's going to put it into, crystallise the argument and the debate, and we don't know how that's going to work out. But if you're Ruth Davison and you're up for first questions and you want to attack the NHS, you want to attack the education, etc., then Nicola's just got the get out of jail free card as well. When are you going to tell your boss in Downing Street to give us more budget, etc. She's going to have to defend austerity, which she wasn't made to do by the papers during the actual campaign.
Well, never has been.
So we've got another 4 years, say.
Yeah.
And in that 4 years, what do we have to do to get people persuaded?
I mean, Michelle talked about the Yes campaign being reinvigorated and reconvened almost. I mean, it's not really gone away, but I think that...
Yes, Scotland has.
Yeah, but the discussions still take place. Sometimes they take place a wee bit more febrile atmosphere than they did before, and I think that part of that will die down after next year's council elections, where people will start to look at the long term, and the next big thing coming up, I suppose, is the Westminster election, but that's already playing into the whole referendum. I think that the Tories being the opposition is terrible for Scotland, but it's very good in terms of the clarity of the arguments for the independence referendum. Because what it does, and my view is that the Labour Party are in such a bad state just now, and some people who have hung on to the Labour Party and therefore hung on to unionism through the Labour Party are going to stop doing that. And I think that when Labour politicians come out, and when long-term Labour members, and I know lots of them left during the referendum process, start to come out and say, we've given it a shot, we can't continue, we know Labour are not going to win in 2020, we see that we're not even the second party in Scotland, it's time to look for another way. And I think at that point, when they start to do that in numbers, which I do believe they will do, then that's the point where we win.
But in the 4 years...
Well, we have to solve the affordability issue without relying on oil to come back. Now, obviously, during the referendum, every time I was interviewed, I said it's not about oil. Oil's just a bonus, etc. Fair enough, but it has dropped off. but it's supposed to be volatile, isn't it? So at some point it will probably come back. But the no campaign is just as I did, it's no longer volatile, it's just down and it's never comes back. But Deloitte did a survey of senior oil managers a few months ago, and 97% of them expect the oil price to recover to 2014 prices within the next 5 years. And so if it does, then there's an issue. But what we need to do is create an economic plan, excluding oil, that actually shows not just that it's affordable, that independence is affordable, that actually shows how we can prosper through independence. And a lot of people they look at they say Scotland's deficit is bigger than, and then they mention Finland, Norway, Sweden, Belgium, and you think, yeah, so we've got actually so many economic advantages versus these countries, and their economy is doing better than ours. What's the difference? Yeah, we're part of the UK. We've got policies that suit big company-led policies from London and the South East, when what we need is bespoke policies for our SME marketplace up here. But if you also look at the areas of Scotland that voted 60% no during the independence referendum, some of them, such as Moray and Aberdeenshire and Perth, those areas vote SNP by the bucket load, and yet they were amongst the highest no votes. Why? Because they're wealthy areas and they didn't buy into what a lot of people like Jim Sillars were promising us all a socialist republic. And you'd be surprised, I didn't really buy into a socialist republic. The republic I could live with, the socialism I'm not so sure about. But essentially, we have to understand that just as the SNP is a broad church, just as the Yes movement was a broad church, a majority Yes vote has to be a broad church as well. And I think we have to move on and actually come up with an answer to affordability and an answer for prosperity in the economy, balanced with the social welfare gains and protections that we need as well. Because the truth of the matter is, and this is where it's quite easy to square the circle, is because you can't afford the welfare policies that people want on the left without also having the prosperity policies, the business growth policies that people on the right want. And right and left working together is what's made the SNP so successful, even before the referendum, was how they got the first majority. And I think we need to actually come up with a balanced approach that actually takes us across the line, and that can be done. That's what Business for Scotland's all about. That's what we'll be working on and making it happen.
Suzanne, how then, you mentioned a certain fatigue with all the elections. When we've got council elections coming up, and then we'll have a lot of elections after Westminster. It's a never-ending series of elections. How do you make sure that people, we are supposed to have a much more politically engaged population in Scotland, and yet we've had election after election? How do you keep that level of engagement?
Well, this is strangely, Michelle and I were talking about this. We were at a Women for Indeed board meeting just last week, and we talked about this at some great length. And one of the big things we're talking about as well is that, if you like, almost what Gordon was saying as well, is the split, the double message, is that a lot of Yes Scotland and a lot of the business case was trying to promise to some people things won't change too much, things won't be terribly different because the economy likes stability, so things won't really change. But when you spoke to people on the ground, and certainly in George Square, in this bar and on the doors, for them it was all about change. So it's a constant balance of trying to say to everything is going to change, nothing will change. And some people want to hear one, and some desperately want to hear the other. And I think a lot of the noisier part of the referendum, and the people who needed it most, the poor, the poverty, the disenfranchised and the disengaged, they needed the real big change, and there hasn't been big change didn't happen. And when people are fighting for something, and a lot of those people, it's their lives, their livelihoods, that they need this change so badly, and they got all involved and they thought, we're really going to do it, things are going to be better, they could perceive the dream, and then it just feels like business as usual back to them again. So of course they're going to fall away, and it's our job to enliven that. And even during this the Holyrood election here, if you read the papers, all you would have thought that the whole Holyrood election was about was a penny on the tax or a penny off the tax. And see, when you were talking to people in the doors, that's not what you were hearing, that's not what they cared about. They weren't interested, by and large. So it's that dichotomy of what business and top levels and media perceive to be what people are interested in, and what people are actually interested in.
Good. Okay.
Sorry.
James.
Right, just to be fair, people have to be interested in the fact that if you want these things, we have to have the money paid.
Oh, absolutely,
so there has
absolutely.
To be that educational process
totally.
that we do marry both things and we make sure that there's a seamless movement
there
between
has
one
to be,
and the other.
you know.
Good. Well, thank you very much all for your contribution. One more final question is, you've written to David Cameron, you're expecting a reply?
Oh, immediately.
So maybe next week you
said
come
just
back. Next week you come back and tell us.
I'll be happy to come back and tell you all.
Good luck with that.
Thank you.
Fine. Thank you very much indeed.
It's been a great show. Thank you for joining us. Before we go, we're playing out with a young Scottish comedian. His name is Christopher MacArthur-Boyd. Welcome to the stage.
Is this a good look? Oh, sorry. Okay.
Yeah, it's nice to be here. We spoke about a lot of stuff today. We had the Hibs thing at the start. I think when Rangers plays Hibs, it's a wee bit like, for Rangers fans, it's a wee bit like margarine. It's like a Celtic substitute. You know, I can't believe it's not sectarian violence. It's great to see. What else has been happening? We had Loki on the show, Scottish rapper. He's left. I think he was intimidated by me. I'm a 4-time Glasgow Stand rap battle champion, and that's scary for some people. I was part of we were talking about the EU referendum thing. I was part of the movement by the Scottish Youth Parliament to get young people to vote, because apparently that's going to swing it if more young people vote. And I did not prepare for at all, which was they seemed disappointed in me. They used most of the things I said, which was nice, but there was a bit where all the other comedians wrote about like 4 pages of material for it, and I just kind of showed up with 2 jokes in my head, and I'd done my 2 jokes, and then everybody in the camera crew kind of just looked at me like, is that it? And I just kind of had to go, yeah. And then I was all mic'd up and stuff, and I walked away, and I was talking to my friends, and I was like, I can't believe how little preparation I put into that. And I realised that I was still mic'd up and that the camera guy could hear me. So that was a fun editing session for them. I think it is important for young people to contribute to politics. I used to study journalism, and then I dropped out because I had a nervous breakdown. But I was going to talk to who's that guy from The Sun?
Alan Muir. Alan
Muir. Maybe I could get a wee job doing like picture editor or something. That would be good.
You're never going to have a nervous breakdown at The Sun.
No, it's very calm over there. But I used to do that, and then I used to live in student accommodation, and then one day I looked in my kitchen cupboard and realised I had more packets of mild curry flavoured soup noodles than I did reasons to live. So moved back in with my mum and dad, and that's not going. It's weird living with your mum and dad, especially when you don't see eye to eye, especially with things like politics. You know, I love my mum and dad during the Scottish independence referendum, and I think everybody's entitled to their own opinion about that. I was a yes voter, my mum was wrong, and I couldn't stay up for the results of the referendum because I have a bedtime. But I woke up in the morning and I didn't know what the future of the country was going to be. I didn't know if we were going to live in some kind of glorious socialist utopia. I didn't know if we were going to live here. And I came downstairs and my mum was sitting on the couch and she was watching TV with a big smile on her face. You know, she wasn't watching Everybody Loves Raymond, was she? She wasn't watching Frasier. She was watching the news. And I was like, I don't know how you can do that to this country. Scotland finally had the chance to steer the rudder of its own ship, and you've dashed that ship up on the rocks. I'll fight for Scottish independence till my bones crumble like stale shortbread. And I'll scream, Viva la Caledonia for the rooftops until my lungs are but the dry, haggard, droning wheeze of the bagpipe. I would rather die on my feet today than live forever on my knees. And my mum said, well, if you like independence so much, why don't you get your own fucking flat? I said, no thanks. We're better together. So, I think that's all I've got time to say for. Sorry for swearing at the end there.
Yes.
I usually swear. Thanks a lot, guys. You've been lovely for having me. Cheers.
That's it for another week. Thank you very much for joining us. From me.
And me. We'll see you next week on The Full Scottish. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.